That rusty old monstrosity has to go, Mr. Miller. It's a blight on this community, and it's in clear violation of Section 7, subsection C, paragraph 2 of the Whispering Pines Estates Covenants. I looked from the woman's perfectly coiffed, helmet-like hair to the structure in question. My windmill. It wasn't a monstrosity. It was history. It was my grandfather's legacy, and now, it was mine. This, I would soon learn, was Carol. The self-appointed queen of our little suburban fiefdom, the president of the Homeowners Association. And she had all the warmth and charm of a tax audit. If you're watching this, you probably know a Carol. Maybe you even live next to one. Let me know in the comments where you're from and what your own personal neighborhood tyrant is like. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button, because you're not going to want to miss how this story ends. You see, I was new to this kind of life. For 40 years, I was a hydrological engineer. I designed water systems for cities, managed watersheds, and understood the intricate dance of pressure, flow, and infrastructure that keeps modern life from collapsing. After my wife, Martha, passed, I sold our big house in the city and bought the one place on earth that held any real meaning for me, my grandfather's original homestead. The land had been sold off decades ago, sprouting 100 identical beige houses that formed Whispering Pines. But the original farmhouse, the barn, and 3 acres of land, including the old well and its windmill, had been preserved. It was an island of character in a sea of conformity. It was supposed to be my quiet place, my project, my peace. Carol, however, had other plans for my peace. She wanted to shatter it, grind it into dust, and then fine me for the mess. I had only been there for 2 months, mostly spending my days clearing out the barn and getting the old house back into shape. The windmill was my passion project. Its blades were a bit weathered, sure, and the steel lattice had a patina of rust that I found beautiful, but it was structurally sound. More than sound, actually. My grandfather built things to outlast empires. My first formal notice arrived on cheap letterhead, tucked under the windshield wiper of my truck. It was a list of violations. The grass was a 1/4 inch too long. A paint can was visible through a garage window. And the centerpiece of her complaint, the unauthorized agricultural structure. I chuckled when I read it. Unauthorized. It had been standing on this spot since before the person who wrote the HOA bylaws was even born. I wrote a polite, concise letter back, explaining the historical nature of the property and the windmill, and included a copy of the deed which clearly stated the original structures were grandfathered in. I thought that would be the end of it. I was a fool. Dealing with people like Carol is like trying to reason with a rockslide. Logic doesn't work. Facts are just inconvenient obstacles. A week later, I got a certified letter. This one included a fine. $100 for the windmill. $50 for the grass. Another $50 for the improperly stored construction materials, which I assumed was the aforementioned paint can. It was then I realized this wasn't about the rules. This was about power. She was testing the fences, seeing if the new guy was an easy target. I paid the fines for the grass and the paint can, just to show I was willing to be a good neighbor. But I contested the windmill fine, again attaching the relevant legal documents. I walked the letter over to her house myself. It was, of course, the largest model in the development, with a lawn so unnaturally green it looked like it had been spray-painted. She opened the door, a tight, artificial smile plastered on her face. Mr. Miller. To what do I owe the pleasure? I just wanted to deliver my response to the latest notice personally, I said, handing her the envelope. I think you'll find everything is in order. The windmill is a pre-existing, legally protected structure. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes went cold. They looked like 2 little chips of ice. We'll see about that. The covenants are very clear. We have standards to maintain in Whispering Pines. I appreciate that, I said calmly. And I appreciate the history of the land your community is built on. That windmill is part of that history. History doesn't pay the bills if property values go down, Mr. Miller, she sniffed, and closed the door in my face. The conversation felt like a declaration of war. A petty, suburban, beige-colored war, but a war nonetheless. I went back to my work. I started the process of carefully restoring the windmill. I hired a local crane operator to help me detach the gearbox and motor for servicing. I meticulously sanded and treated the fan blades. It was honest, satisfying work. It connected me to my grandfather, a man who believed in building things that lasted. Carol, it seemed, only believed in tearing things down. The next phase of her assault was more insidious. She started a campaign of public shaming. Posts appeared on the community's private social media page. Pictures of my windmill, taken from unflattering angles, with captions like, "Does this tetanus trap belong in our beautiful neighborhood?" #eyesore, #property values. Comments poured in, mostly from her sycophants. So unsafe. My kids could get hurt on that thing. Call the county inspector. I was a private man. The idea of my home, my sanctuary, being debated and derided by a bunch of strangers was deeply unsettling. It felt like a violation. The fines kept coming, each one larger than the last. She was burying me in paper, hoping I'd get tired and just give in. I documented everything. I saved every letter, took screenshots of every social media post, and kept a detailed log of my attempts to communicate reasonably with the HOA board, which was really just Carol and two nervous-looking men who nodded whenever she spoke. I wasn't a confrontational person by nature. My entire career was built on finding elegant, efficient solutions to complex problems. People were not elegant. They were messy, emotional, and often, completely irrational. But Martha had always said I had a spine of steel when it counted. I just preferred not to use it. The turning point came on a Saturday afternoon. My daughter, Sarah, had brought my two grandchildren, Lily and Tom, over for a visit. They were 8 and 6, and they loved the farm. To them, the windmill wasn't an eyesore, it was a castle tower, a spaceship, a giant's pinwheel. They were playing in the yard, their laughter echoing in the clear autumn air, when Carol's car screeched to a halt on the road in front of my property. She rolled down the window, her face a mask of fury. "Mr. Miller. This is an active work site. It is entirely inappropriate for you to have children here. It's a safety hazard," she shrieked, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at my grandkids. Lily and Tom stopped playing, their faces crumpling in confusion and fear. Sarah rushed out of the house, her expression darkening. "Excuse me," Sarah said, stepping between Carol and her children. "Who do you think you are, yelling at my kids? I am the president of this association, and that junk pile," she gestured wildly at the windmill parts one had neatly laid out on a tarp, "is a danger to this entire community. If one of those children gets hurt, you will be held liable." That was it. The line had been crossed. This was no longer about covenants or property values. She had brought my family into it. She had frightened my grandchildren. I walked slowly to her car, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. I felt a cold, calm anger settle over me, the kind of focused rage that is far more dangerous than any screaming fit. "Carol," I said, my voice low and even. "You will not speak to my daughter or my grandchildren again. Ever. You have an issue with me, you deal with me. This is your only warning." She scoffed, a brittle, ugly sound. "A warning? Are you threatening me, Mr. Miller? I'll have you know that's a serious offense." "It's not a threat," I said, looking her directly in the eye. "It's a statement of fact. A boundary. You just crossed it. Do not do it again." She stared at me for a moment, perhaps seeing something in my face she hadn't seen before. The patient, reasonable engineer was gone. In his place was a man who had just been pushed too far. She rolled up her window without another word and sped off, tires squealing in protest. I turned back to my family. Sarah was comforting the kids, who were still shaken. I knelt down and hugged them tightly. "Don't you worry," I whispered to them. "That mean lady won't bother you again. Grandpa's going to fix it." And in that moment, I made a decision. I was done reacting. I was done being polite. My peace-seeking phase was officially over. It was time to go on the offensive. It was time to start digging. Carol had no idea who she was dealing with. She thought I was just some old man with a rusty hobby. She didn't know that for 40 years, my job had been to find the hidden flaws in systems, to trace the flow of power, and to understand the unseen infrastructure that holds everything together. And I was about to apply my entire professional skill set to the ticking time bomb of Whispering Pines Estates and its tyrannical president. Her little house of cards was about to face a seismic event. That night, after Sarah and the kids had gone home, I sat at my grandfather's old oak desk. The quiet of the house felt different. It wasn't just peaceful anymore, it was the quiet of a command center before a major operation. I pulled out a fresh legal pad and a pen. At the top of the page, I wrote a single heading, Project Nightingale. I named it after the faint, creaking song the windmill used to sing in the wind. This project was about making it sing again. My strategy had to be methodical, precise, and built on a foundation of irrefutable fact. Carol operated in a world of emotion, intimidation, and outright lies. I would operate in mine, a world of blueprints, bylaws, and public records. The first step was information gathering. I spent the next week not in my workshop, but in the county records office. It was a dusty, forgotten place, filled with the scent of old paper and quiet dignity. I felt right at home. I pulled the original plat maps for the entire Whispering Pines development. I requested the minutes from every HOA meeting for the past 5 years. I cross-referenced the developer's original building permits with the county's utility easements. It was like piecing together a giant, boring puzzle. But I loved it. I was tracing the history of this place, not in stories, but in official, legally binding documents. And that's when I found the first crack in Carol's perfect facade. According to the HOA's own financial statements, they had paid over $80,000 in the last 2 years to a company called Advanced Horticultural Solutions for common area landscape maintenance that seemed excessively high for mowing a few patches of grass and trimming the bushes at the entrance. A quick search of the state's business registry revealed that Advanced Horticultural Solutions was a limited liability company registered just 2 years ago. The registered agent? A man named Bob Peterson. A little more digging on social media, and I found him. Bob Peterson was Carol's brother-in-law. The conflict of interest was so blatant it was almost insulting. She was funneling HOA dues directly into her own family's pockets. It was a start, but it was likely just petty graft. I needed something bigger. I needed something that tied directly to her campaign against my windmill. That's when I brought in my ally. Dave was a retired fire captain I'd met at the local hardware store. We'd bonded over a shared frustration with modern power tools that were designed to break. He was a straight shooter, a man who had spent his life dealing with emergencies and had no patience for manufactured drama. He also knew the area like the back of his hand. I invited him over for coffee, laying out the stack of documents on my kitchen table. "So the queen bee is giving you trouble, huh?" he said, after I explained the situation. "Doesn't surprise me. Heard stories about her for years. It's more than just trouble, Dave. She's fabricating violations and harassing my family. But I think there's something else going on. Something bigger." I pointed to the plat maps. "This whole development was built in the early 90s, right?" "Yep," he said, sipping his coffee. "They threw these houses up fast. Caused a lot of headaches for us at the fire department. Water pressure was always an issue out here." My ears perked up. "Water pressure? Tell me more." "Well, this area is on a bit of a rise, and it's at the very end of the county water main. To meet the code for fire hydrants, the developer had to install a booster pump station to ensure adequate pressure for our trucks. It was a whole big thing at the time. I felt a familiar thrill, the same one I used to get when I was closing in on a critical design flaw. A booster pump station. Where is it?" Dave frowned, thinking. "You know, that's a good question. It's supposed to be in a little utility shed somewhere in the common area. Haven't had to hook up to these hydrants in years, thank God. But we do a flow test every spring." He paused. "Come to think of it, the last couple of tests have been a little sluggish. Just barely meeting the minimum required gallons per minute." My mind was racing, connecting disparate pieces of information. The developer's rush job. The water pressure issues. Carol's obsessive, irrational hatred of my windmill. "Dave," I said slowly, "my grandfather was a clever man. He didn't just build this windmill for looks. It drew water from a deep artesian well on this property. Sure, for the farm. Makes sense. But what if it did more? What if, when the developer bought the land, he made a deal? A deal to use my grandfather's well and pump system as a supplemental source to boost the pressure for his new fire hydrants, saving him the cost of building and maintaining a whole separate station. Dave stared at me, his eyes wide. You think that old thing is tied into the hydrant system? I think it's a possibility, I said. And if it is, the original easement agreements would have to be on file with the county water authority. It was a long shot, a theory based on a hunch and a vague memory of my grandfather grumbling about some deal he'd made. But if I was right, it was more than a smoking gun. It was a tactical nuke. The next day, I wasn't at the county clerk's office. I was at the Water Authority archives, a place even more obscure and dusty. It took the clerk hours to find what I was looking for, buried in a box of forgotten files from a corporate entity that had gone bankrupt a decade ago, the original developer of Whispering Pines Estates. And there it was. A legally binding, permanent utility easement, signed by my grandfather. It granted the development perpetual access to the water from his well, pumped and pressurized by his windmill, for the exclusive purpose of supplying the fire suppression system. In return, his property was to be exempt from all HOA fees and assessments in perpetuity. I read the document 3 times, my heart pounding in my chest. Not only was my windmill not a violation, it was a crucial piece of the community's safety infrastructure. And not only did I not have to pay Carol's ridiculous fines, I didn't have to pay any HOA fees at all. She had been illegally assessing me from the day I moved in. The sheer, beautiful, poetic justice of it all was overwhelming. She had chosen the one thing she couldn't touch. She had picked a fight with the one structure that was holding her entire kingdom together. She wasn't just digging her own grave, she was trying to bulldoze the very ground the cemetery was built on. But finding this document wasn't the end. It was the beginning. This was my leverage, my foundation. Now, I could build my case. Now, I could set my trap. My first step was to restore the windmill to full operational capacity. This was no longer just a hobby. It was a mission. I worked with a focus and intensity one hadn't felt in years. I cleaned and lubricated the gearbox until it moved with silent precision. I recalibrated the furling system that protected it in high winds. I re-greased the yaw bearing, allowing the head to turn smoothly to face the breeze. Then, I moved on to the pump itself. It was a classic air-motor deep well pump, a masterpiece of simple, robust engineering. I replaced the old leather seals and polished the brass cylinder until it shone. When I was done, I reassembled the entire mechanism. The crane operator came back and we carefully hoisted the heavy motor and blades back to the top of the tower. As the final bolt was tightened, a gentle breeze swept across the property. The great fan began to turn, slowly at first, then picking up speed. It was silent, powerful, and beautiful. The creak was gone, replaced by a nearly inaudible, satisfying whir. Project Nightingale was ready to sing. Down below, deep in the earth, the pump rod began its steady, rhythmic dance. Water, pure and cold, began to flow into the pressure tank at the base of the tower, just as it had for 70 years. A pressure gauge, which I had newly installed, began to climb. It settled at a rock-steady 85 psi, well above the required pressure for the hydrant system. But the plan required more than just a working windmill. It required evidence. Undeniable, irrefutable proof of Carol's malice and her own criminal incompetence. So, I invested in a few modern tools my grandfather never could have dreamed of. I installed several high-definition, motion-activated security cameras around my property. They were small, discreet, and positioned to cover every angle of the windmill, my driveway, and the front of my house. Any visitor, welcome or otherwise, would be recorded in crystal-clear detail. The next phase of the plan was to set the bait. I needed Carol to overplay her hand. I needed her to commit a critical, documented error. I sent a simple, polite letter to the HOA board. Dear board members, I wrote, pursuant to my ongoing efforts to comply with community standards, I have completed the restoration of the historical windmill on my property. I trust you will find its current condition to be a vast improvement. I consider this matter closed. I knew this would be like waving a red flag in front of a bull. Telling Carol a matter was closed was telling her to escalate. And escalate she did. 2 days later, another certified letter arrived. This one was different. It wasn't a fine. It was a formal notice of condemnation. The Whispering Pines Estates Architectural Review Committee, which I knew was just Carol in a different hat, has determined that the unapproved structure located at your address presents an imminent danger to the health, safety, and welfare of the community. The structure has been condemned. You have 30 days to have it professionally dismantled and removed. Failure to comply will result in the HOA contracting for its removal and placing a lien on your property for the full amount. It was breathtaking in its audacity. She had no legal authority to condemn anything. It was a complete fabrication, a scare tactic designed to bully me into submission. But it was also the document I needed. It was her signature on a fraudulent legal notice. It was a felony. I scanned the letter and saved it to a secure folder on my computer, right next to the video file from my camera that showed the postal worker delivering it. Now it was time to add a little pressure. Literally. My grandfather, bless his forward-thinking heart, had included a large bypass valve in the plumbing system. With a turn of a wheel, I could completely disconnect the Windmill's pump from the hydrant main, leaving the system to rely solely on the sluggish pressure from the county line. One evening, around 2 a.m., when I knew no one would be awake or using any water, I snuck out to the pump house. I filmed the entire process on my phone for documentation. I showed the current pressure on the gauge, a healthy 85 psi. Then, with a grunt of effort, I slowly turned the heavy cast iron wheel of the bypass valve. I watched the gauge on the hydrant line plummet. It dropped and dropped, finally settling at a pathetic 30 psi. It was barely enough to fill a bucket, let alone fight a fire. I left it that way for 6 hours. Then, before dawn, I went back out and restored the connection. The pressure shot back up to normal. It was a successful test. I now knew for a fact that my windmill was the only thing keeping the community's fire hydrants functional. And I had the data to prove it. The trap was set. The evidence was gathered. Now, I just had to wait for the Queen to walk into her own checkmate. The 30-day deadline on her condemnation notice approached. I did nothing. I continued my work, enjoying the quiet hum of the restored windmill and the peace of my little sanctuary. I was the calm in the center of a storm I had engineered. Carol was not calm. My cameras captured her driving by my house multiple times a day, her face a thundercloud. She was furious that I was ignoring her. Her authority was being challenged, and she couldn't stand it. On the 29th day, she made her move. It happened just after dusk. My cameras picked up a dark sedan parking down the street. 2 figures emerged, dressed in dark clothing. They moved furtively along the edge of the woods that bordered my property. As they got closer, the infrared night vision on the cameras made their faces perfectly clear. It was Carol. And with her was one of the nervous-looking men from the HOA board. He was carrying a heavy bolt cutter. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my mind was perfectly clear. This was it. This was the moment. I sat in my office, watching the live feed on my monitor like it was a movie premiere. They crept up to the fence surrounding the base of the windmill. He handed her the bolt cutters. She, the great president, was going to do the dirty work herself. She positioned the jaws of the cutter around the heavy padlock on the gate. She squeezed. The lock snapped with a dull clang that the camera's microphone picked up perfectly. They swung the gate open and stepped inside the enclosure, trespassing on my property. "Just cut a few of these," she whispered, her voice a harsh rasp in the quiet night. She pointed to the thick steel tension cables that ran from the tower legs to deep concrete anchors in the ground. "Cut 2 on the same side. The next big wind will do the rest. It will look like an accident. A structural failure." The men hesitated. "Carol, I don't know about this. This is destruction of property. This is a crime." "It's not a crime," she hissed. "It's a safety measure. The board approved it. Now do it before someone sees us." He reluctantly took the cutters and positioned them on one of the cables. My hand hovered over the phone, my finger on the 911 icon. But I waited. I needed the act itself. With a loud snap, the first cable broke free, whipping through the air like a steel snake. He moved to the next one. As the jaws of the bolt cutter closed around the second cable, I hit dial. 911, what is your emergency? "Yes," I said, my voice steady and calm. "I'd like to report a crime in progress." Vandalism and trespassing. I have 2 individuals on my property actively trying to destroy a large structure. I have them on live video. I gave the operator my address and a description of Carol and her little helper. I stayed on the line, watching my monitor. They had just cut the second cable when the distant sound of sirens began to wail. Carol's head snapped up. Her eyes were wide with panic. What was that? Cops, the men stammered, dropping the bolt cutters. Someone must have called the cops. We have to go. They scrambled out of the enclosure and ran, clumsy and terrified, back towards their car. But it was too late. 2 police cruisers, lights flashing but sirens now off, were already pulling onto my street, effectively blocking their escape. I watched on the monitor as the officers intercepted them. I could see Carol gesturing wildly, probably trying to spin some story about conducting an official HOA inspection. It didn't work. The bolt cutters lying on the ground next to my damaged windmill were hard to explain. A few minutes later, an officer was at my door. I invited him in and showed him the video footage. I showed him the condemnation letter. I showed him everything. He watched it all, his expression growing more and more grim. Well, ma'am, he said, speaking into his radio after he'd seen enough, we've got trespassing, criminal mischief, and attempted destruction of property. And it looks like the HOA president is our primary suspect. I watched through my window as they put Carol in the back of the police car. Her perfect hair was messed up, her face was streaked with dirt and tears of rage. She was screaming, not with the controlled fury I was used to, but with the raw, desperate panic of a cornered animal. It was a victory, but I knew it was only the first battle. This was the reveal of her petty criminality. The big show was yet to come. The fallout from Carol's late-night adventure was immediate and glorious. News of the HOA president being arrested for trying to sabotage a resident's property spread through Whispering Pines like wildfire. The community social media page, once her personal propaganda machine, erupted in a firestorm of shock, anger, and schadenfreude. Her 2 board member cronies resigned the next morning via a hastily written email. The entire power structure she had so carefully built crumbled in less than 12 hours. But Carol was nothing if not a fighter. She posted bail and immediately went on the offensive. Her new narrative was that she was a brave public servant, taking decisive action to remove a dangerous structure that I, a stubborn and unreasonable old man, had refused to deal with. She claimed the condemnation notice gave her the authority to act. Her lies were flimsy, and most people saw right through them. But she still had supporters, and more importantly, she was still technically the president. She called an emergency HOA meeting, ostensibly to address the recent unfortunate misunderstanding. In reality, it was a desperate attempt to control the narrative and save her skin. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile, beige room that perfectly matched the houses outside. The air was thick with tension. It was standing room only. For the first time, nearly every homeowner in the development was present. They wanted a show. I was determined to give them one. I arrived with Dave, my fire captain friend, who was there in his official capacity at my request. I also had a briefcase containing my evidence, the easement document, the financial records showing her brother-in-law's company, a copy of the police report, and a USB drive with the video of her midnight escapade. Carol stood at a podium at the front of the room, looking haggard but defiant. She launched into a rambling, self-pitying speech about her tireless dedication to the community and the thankless job of enforcing the rules for everyone's benefit. This entire situation, she said, her voice dripping with manufactured outrage, is the result of one man's refusal to comply with the same rules we all live by. My only mistake was trying to protect you, the good people of this community, from a clear and present danger. A few of her loyalists applauded weakly. Most of the room was silent, watching, waiting. When she finished, she asked if there were any questions, a smug look on her face as if she had just won a great debate. I raised my hand. Yes, Mr. Miller, she said, her voice laced with venom. I'm sure you have something to say. I walked to the front of the room, setting my briefcase on the table. I do, Carol. I have several questions, in fact. My first one is about this condemnation notice you sent me. I projected a copy of it onto the screen behind her. Could you please point me to the specific state statute or county ordinance that grants a homeowners association the authority to condemn private property? She sputtered. It's inherent in the bylaws. The Architectural Committee has broad powers to ensure community safety. So, there is no such law. I pressed. You just made it up. You created a fraudulent legal document to intimidate a resident. Is that correct? The room started to murmur. My next question, I continued, not waiting for an answer, is about the imminent danger you mentioned. You claim my windmill is a safety hazard. I was wondering if Fire Captain Dave Reynolds, who is here with us tonight, could speak to the safety of the neighborhood's infrastructure. Dave stepped forward, his uniform giving him an immediate air of authority. Good evening, he said, his voice calm and professional. As part of our standard procedures, and at Mr. Miller's request, my team and I conducted a full-flow test of the Whispering Pines fire hydrants this afternoon. He paused for dramatic effect. The room was dead silent. The results were alarming. The pressure from the county main is dangerously low. In the event of a major house fire, the water pressure would be insufficient for our equipment to function effectively. In short, your homes are not adequately protected. A wave of shocked and angry muttering swept through the crowd. Carol looked pale. That's impossible. We pay the county for water service. That you do, Dave said. But your development is at the end of the line. Which is why, according to the original plans, a supplemental booster system was required. He looked over at me. This was my cue. And that supplemental system, I said, my voice ringing with clarity, is the windmill. My windmill. I projected the utility easement from 1991 onto the screen. This is a legally binding document, filed with the county, granting the development access to the water from my well, pumped by my windmill, for the sole purpose of pressurizing your fire hydrants. The very structure you tried to tear down is the only thing ensuring this community has adequate fire protection. The room exploded. People were shouting, pointing at Carol, demanding answers. She stood at the podium, her face ashen, opening and closing her mouth like a fish out of water. But I wasn't done yet. This was just the first reveal. The main event was still to come. The criminal charges for vandalism were one thing, but I knew her real weakness, the one that would ensure her complete and total ruin, was money. Carol, feeling the walls close in, did exactly what I expected her to do. She went nuclear. The legal battle over her arrest was one thing, but she launched a vicious, personal smear campaign against me. She used a new, anonymous social media profile to spread disgusting lies. She accused me of being a recluse, a danger to children, and even hinted at more sinister things. She sent letters to my daughter's employer, claiming I was unstable and that Sarah should be monitored. It was a desperate, despicable attack from a cornered animal. It was also a massive mistake. It angered me, yes, but more importantly, it galvanized the community against her. People who were on the fence now saw her for the venomous tyrant she truly was. And it pushed one person over the edge. I received an anonymous email one night. The subject line was, Whispering Pines. The email was short. I can't stand by and watch her destroy a good man's life. She's a crook. Look at the invoices for the new pump station project, they're all fake. The account she's paying is in her maiden name. Attached was a series of scanned documents. Invoices from a non-existent company called Municipal Water Solutions for over $200,000. Bank statements showing payments from the HOA account into an account held by one Carol Becker, her maiden name. It was all there. She had been embezzling money for years under the guise of a project to replace the aging booster pump system. The very system she knew didn't exist, because it was my windmill. Her campaign to destroy my windmill wasn't just about aesthetics or control. It was about destroying the evidence of her crime. If the windmill was gone, no one would ever question where the booster pump was or why it needed replacing. She could have just kept billing the HOA for its maintenance forever. The email had come from the HOA treasurer. The whistleblower, he was one of the nervous men who had always flanked her at meetings, and he had finally found his conscience. This was the final piece. The proof of a major felony. This went far beyond the local police and a charge of criminal mischief. This was wire fraud. This was embezzlement on a massive scale. The next morning, I didn't call the local police. I called the State Police Financial Crimes Unit. I also called the State Water Resource Board to report the critical failure of the community's fire suppression system. And for good measure, I called the investigative reporter at the biggest news station in the capital. I laid out the entire story for them, providing them with a meticulously organized portfolio of evidence. The fraudulent condemnation notice. The video of the attempted sabotage. The utility easement. The forged invoices and bank statements from the whistleblower. They were impressed. The detective at the Financial Crimes Unit sounded practically giddy. It's not every day a perfect, self-contained case with a bow on top lands on your desk. The final showdown was not at an HOA meeting. It was at a special session of the town council, called to address the now public safety crisis in Whispering Pines. The fire marshal was there. The State Water Board representative was there. The police were there. And so was a camera crew from the news. Carol was there too, legally obligated to attend as the HOA president. She looked like a ghost. Her defiance was gone, replaced by a brittle, terrified shell. She clearly had no idea what was about to hit her. The meeting began with the fire marshal giving a damning report on the state of the hydrants, confirming everything Dave and I had uncovered. Then, the town manager asked me to speak. I walked to the podium, calm and composed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't use inflammatory language. I simply laid out the facts, one by one, like an engineer presenting a technical briefing. I started with the history of the property and the windmill. I showed the easement. I explained its function. Then, I moved on to Carol's campaign of harassment. I showed the fines, the social media posts, the fraudulent condemnation letter. Then, I played the video. The entire room watched in stunned silence as the president of their homeowners association, under the cover of darkness, broke into my property and tried to destroy the very machine keeping them safe. I could hear gasps from the audience. Finally, I addressed the money. For 2 years, I said, my voice steady, President Carol has been collecting a special assessment from every homeowner in this community. An assessment totaling over $200,000. The stated purpose was to fund the replacement of the community's failing water booster pump. I let that hang in the air for a moment. As we now know, there is no community water booster pump to replace. There is only my windmill. So the question is, where did that money go? I projected the invoices from Municipal Water Solutions and the corresponding bank statements showing the deposits into Carol Becker's account. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of 100 people simultaneously realizing they had been lied to, cheated, and stolen from by the woman they had entrusted with their community. All eyes turned to Carol. She broke. It wasn't a slow crumble, it was a catastrophic failure. Her face, which had been pale, turned a blotchy, furious red. Lies. It's all lies, she shrieked, jumping to her feet. He's a crazy old man. He doctored those documents. He's trying to ruin me because I stood up to him. He's the criminal. She pointed a trembling finger at me, her eyes wild. He's the one who endangered this community with his rusty death trap. I was trying to save you all. I did it for you. Her ranting grew more and more unhinged. She implicated herself further with every word, admitting she collected the money but insisting it was for future projects. As she descended into her hysterical meltdown, 2 plainclothes state police detectives, who had been sitting quietly in the back, stood up and began walking toward her. They reached her at the table. One of them, a tall, no-nonsense woman, said calmly, Carol Peterson. You're under arrest for felony embezzlement, wire fraud, and insurance fraud. Carol looked at them, her mouth still open from her last shriek. The reality of the situation finally seemed to penetrate her bubble of self-righteous fury. All the color drained from her face. As they put the handcuffs on her, her eyes found mine across the room. The hatred in them was pure and undiluted. You, she hissed, her voice a low, venomous growl. You will regret this. I will destroy you. It was her last, impotent threat. A final, hollow echo from a queen whose kingdom had just been utterly dismantled. I just looked at her, held her gaze, and gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. I didn't need to say a word. The quiet, steady turning of my windmill outside was all the response that was needed. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Carol's public unmasking and arrest sent a shockwave through the community, but it was a cleansing one. With the tyrant gone, the atmosphere in Whispering Pines changed almost overnight. The two remaining board members, the ones who had enabled Carol through their silence, were forced to resign in disgrace. A special election was held, and a new board was voted in. The new president was a retired accountant, a quiet woman who was more interested in balanced budgets than personal power. One of her first acts was to formally dissolve the Architectural Review Committee, stating that people should be trusted to maintain their own homes. The community, freed from the cloud of constant scrutiny and petty rules, began to breathe again. People started talking to their neighbors. Kids played in the streets. There was a neighborhood barbecue, the first in years. It turned out that Whispering Pines was full of decent, reasonable people who had simply been cowed into silence by a bully. As for Carol, her downfall was as complete as it was spectacular. Faced with an ironclad case, she pleaded guilty to multiple felonies. The judge was not lenient. He sentenced her to 5 years in state prison. The court also ordered full restitution of the embezzled funds, forcing the sale of her oversized house and all her assets. Her brother-in-law's landscaping company went bankrupt, and he faced his own charges for collusion and tax evasion. She lost everything: her money, her home, her freedom, and the one thing she craved most of all, her status. She went from being the queen of Whispering Pines to a cautionary tale. My life returned to the peace I had originally sought, but it was a richer, more satisfying peace. I was no longer an outsider. I was the man who had liberated the neighborhood. People would wave as they drove by. Neighbors would stop to chat, often asking about the Windmill, which had become a beloved local landmark. The HOA, under its new leadership, presented me with a formal, written apology for the harassment I had endured. They also presented me with a check for every dollar I had been illegally charged in fees and fines, with interest. And they signed a new, simplified contract with me for the Windmill water services, paying a modest annual fee for the maintenance of the pump, a fee which I promptly donated to the local volunteer fire department. My daughter and grandkids visited often. The fear they had felt was replaced with pride. To them, I was a hero who had fought a dragon and won. Tom and Lily would spend hours watching the giant blades turn against the blue sky, understanding, in their own way, that the windmill was more than just a machine. It was a symbol of resilience, of history, and of the quiet strength that comes from standing your ground. Sometimes, in the evenings, I would sit on my porch and watch the sunset paint the sky behind the spinning blades of the windmill. It no longer just sang the song of the wind, it sang a song of justice. It was a testament to the idea that bullies, no matter how powerful they seem, are often just hollow shells, propped up by fear and lies. And sometimes, all it takes is one person, armed with patience, diligence, and the truth, to push them over and watch them shatter. It taught me that you don't have to be a loud or confrontational person to win a fight. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is a deep understanding of how things work, whether it's a water pump or a corrupt system. You just have to find the critical failure point, apply the right amount of pressure, and let the whole rotten structure collapse under its own weight. My peace was hard-won, but it was real. And as the windmill turned, pumping life-saving water into the community that had once scorned it, I knew my grandfather would be proud. I had protected his legacy. And in doing so, I had built my own.